Nowadays, I have to read more code than to write, partly because I have to mentor some folks who are new to programming, and their code generally works, however, it is annoying to read. And since I don't want to end up like this, or want you to end up like that, here are some advices to improve the readability of your code. And for that, let's look at a code written by a newbie which actually solves a problem and see how its readability can be improved. So the problem is, write a program to encode all the data in the database inside the admin panel. Make sure to check the things below. And after the encoding is done, make sure to reload the admin page. Simple enough, and here's the code which sort of works. Let's see what it does. So it checks for established connection and login and admin perms, after which it fetches the panel and then its entries and then goes through the entries, does something, and then saves them inside new entries, and that is used to replace the old entries inside the panel, and the panel is refreshed, and any sort of fail is dealt with the respective else block. Even though it works, the most annoying part about this are the nested if statements and also the else statements, which sort of works in the opposite order. Also, one more additional to be conditional to be added and you are doomed. And that is why my first advice is to never nest by using the guard clause pattern. In this pattern, instead of checking for the right conditions, we look for the wrong conditions and return as soon as we found one. That's enough word. Now let's look at an example. Here, we check if the connection is not established and fail early. As you can see, the single line of change has drastically improved the readability. Refactoring the entire function looks like this, and I will let you be the judge. Everything is so symmetrical all of a sudden, and the cause and failure are so easy to read. Now the code is almost perfect, except the elephant in the room. The single line of code which randomly throws an error. And one good way to understand why something is not working is to first understand or know what is the thing that you are trying to do. And that is where my next advice comes in, which is comments before code. Instead of writing the code directly, I first advise you to break the function into multiple things and comment those out first and then code those one by one, so that instead of making a spaghetti, you will actually break down the problem and know which part is not working, if any. Now the code is much more easier to read and won't give a migraine to someone who is trying to read and understand what the code was doing, and makes debugging much easier. However, we are still not sure where the error is coming from, so let's do what every new Vim user cannot and hover over the function and check its documentation. So reading from this documentation, we can see that this function can throw a DB error, and that is what we have to catch. And in that case, we should roll back to the previous one. Great. Now the function also works and also looks pretty easy to read. However, we can do better. And that is why there is one spot still left where we can do better, and that is this bit. Reading it in first glance does not explain what we are trying to do. So rather, we should extract it on in its own method. And that is where the next advice comes in, which is don't be shy to add more functions, even if you are going to use it only once. It might not make much sense for beginners, but the reason we do this is so that a function's intent is clear and which makes debugging much easier. Sweet, the function is done and it looks perfect and easier to deal with readability wise and also debugging wise, even though it contains no more errors. There is still one more advice that I would like to give you, and for that we will have to look at different code. So the advice which is really applicable in this case is to not be shy. Just in general, it is good to not be shy, I guess. However, in this scenario, don't be shy to add more variables. Instead of hard coding the velocity, what you should do is make a variable velocity, which you may even use once. However, it is easier to know why that number is present there instead of just making the reader guess. After refactoring the code, it looks like this, not much difference. However, if you were to do any add something else to this function, like some calculations, like a booster function, see how easier it is to deal with now. Otherwise, you would have to go to every velocity and change the hard-coded number yourself, which saves you time and also it is easier for the reader, of course. And the last advice, which I could not think of an example to include in this one, but it will really save you a lot of time and headache if you follow these, which is to just do this and prefer paper before IDE. Instead of just going to code and just thinking of your idea and going to code it, write it down in paper first and break it down into steps and deal with the problem in smaller chunks instead of dealing with it directly. Trust me, it will save you a lot of time and headache and will increase your productivity a lot in the long run. Well, that was it. And I don't know how to do an outro.